Good afternoon. My name is Dr. F.A.P.A. I'm the coordinator of the graduate programs here at Deree in counseling, psychology, and psychotherapy. And I want to welcome everyone, and specifically our guest, Dr. Nancy McWilliams, who's here for the third time, and Dr. Kernberg, that we have the great honor of hosting here at Weill College. I have to say that I'm actually personally moved because as a graduate student in New York, I felt very proud that I had the chance to sit in one of your lectures, and I never thought I would get a chance again, so I have been very honored to have that for a second time. I want to invite Provost Zaharopoulos to the podium so that he can introduce our guests. Thank you everyone for coming and enjoy the lecture.
Wow, this is a wonderful crowd. Welcome to the American College of Greece. Delighted to see you all. I want to welcome you on my behalf, as well as our president, President Horner, who could not be here today due to an emergency meeting. It's always nice to have people on this campus, besides, of course, our students who are really here and always here, and our faculty who are here night and day, I think. But we're here to partake in this important event because we have two distinguished people visiting us. Of course, Nancy McWilliams, who's here, as you heard, for the third time, and we're delighted to have you. Thank you. And of course, Otto Kernberg, who is, of course, a renowned scholar in the field. As I was looking at some of his background, I noticed that we had something in common, which is that we spent, not at the same time, but at different times, a number of years in Topeka, Kansas, both of us. And I had actually visited the Menninger Clinic numerous times because I had two friends, Greek friends, who actually were doctors there. And they were a bad influence on me because they taught me how to smoke cigars. Anyway, this is one of the important reasons why educational institutions exist, to add to the body of knowledge and to share knowledge. And that's what we're doing in this next 2 days, tonight and the next 2 days. You probably know much about Professor Kernberg, but I should tell you that he's the director of Personality Disorders Institute at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. He's, of course, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at Weill Medical College of Cornell. And, you know, I can go on and on. I mean, you're here because you know all of that, and we're delighted to have him. Nancy McWilliams teaches at Rutgers University Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, and has, of course, a private practice as well. Is in New Jersey. As she told me, she's originally from Western Massachusetts. And she is also a renowned author and a scholar. And again, we're delighted to have her come up and speak and then introduce our honored guest. Welcome and thank you.
Καλό απόγευμα. Thank you, Provost Zaharopoulos. I see many familiar faces, and it's wonderful to be back. Here's the plan for tonight. I'm going to say a few words about Dr. Kernberg. He is going to talk for about an hour. Then we will open it up for discussion. I find that I often learn more when I'm engaged with dialogue, and that's often true with Dr. Kernberg. I've learned more from him when he has an opportunity to respond to questions and comments. What I want to say about him is that he is a great integrator. This probably has something to do with the fact that he is both European, or all three, European, South American, and North American. He's got very wide interests in the science, in the social sciences, and especially the arts. Many of you know his writings, but perhaps you don't know as much about his long-standing interest in supervising and engaging with creative others, whether students or colleagues. He's been tireless politically in challenging training procedures that deaden therapists' natural vitality and subdue their curiosity and their creativity. He enjoys differences of opinion and never takes them personally, and he never loses the differentiation between ideas that he may not like and thinkers that he may like very much as people. So he's a very easy person to have an interesting argument with. I won't go on too long because I'm going to start embarrassing him, but one thing I do want to say is that unlike many important theorists, he is allergic to being idealized. My personal debt to him, though, is very great, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to say something about that. When I got the idea to write the diagnosis book that I know many of you have read, I was an unknown in the field, and I went to him. He gave me of his time, he shared his lunch with me, and he encouraged me to write that book. I don't know if you remember that meeting, but it made a great deal of difference to me, and he's done that with numerous people throughout the field. I also want to acknowledge his wife, Kay Haran, and his longtime colleague, whom I've been pleased to know for more than 20 years. So, having said all that, I will turn the program over to Dr. Kernberg, who is going to be talking about the components and functions of a normal personality, the nature of personality disorders, their overall symptomatology and underlying structure, and the relationship between neurobiological, intrapsychic, and behavioral aspects of normal and pathological personality organization.
Thank you, Nancy, for your kind introduction. I'm impressed by the fact that I imagine everybody speaks English here, although I should assume that in this college. Can you hear me in the last row? Yes, okay. So I would like to review with you the concept of personality and personality disorder. It is an actual issue because there is so much confusion about it in the field and so much controversy because different researchers have studied different aspects of personality, both normal and abnormal, and each of them classifies and organizes things according to his own field. You have Kleinian, who has studied affect systems and then classifies personality according to the predominant pathology of one of the major neuromeans that determine major affect activation. You have social psychologists such as Lorna Smith Benjamin, who is interested in the social interactional aspects of personality and organizes it around the concepts of affiliative versus aversive or hostile behavior, dominance and submission, and creates a structure of personality built on the interpersonal functions of it. You have the psychoanalysts who build a classification on the basis of the predominant drive-derived conflicts, oral, anal, phallic personality structure, etc. And then, of course, the epidemiologists who study large groups of normal populations, make endless lists of personality traits, about 150, and submit thousands of individuals to them and find out which one, by factor analytic studies, group together and classify personality according to the grouping of personality traits on those tests, on those instruments. This leads to the 5 factors theory that I'm sure everybody knows, and that has been very influential. And the communication between those different orientations is, not to say zero, I would say rather limited, and that shows in the committees that classify personality disorders on the DSM system in the United States and the ICD system in Europe. And those committees make decisions politically according to who cries louder. If you believe that I'm exaggerating, I assure you I'm not, that the discussions are really political influence and not an effort to bring all their acts together. So this is what makes the subject, I would say, almost unnecessarily complicated. I pride myself that in our institute we have been trying to look at the various theories and how to bring them together in the light of the empirical evidence and the clinical evidence. We think it's important to both do empirical studies with a significant number of subjects, but also to look at individual patients intensively over an extended period of time, and that these two sources of knowledge have to come together. And on that basis, over the past 30 years, we developed our own system that I want to summarize to you. I'm not saying that's the best way to define and classify and organize personality structure, but it's one effort to bring together those perspectives. And the basic theory that underlies our work is that personality as a psychological thing is based upon the brain as a physiological thing, and that both brain and psychological structures operate not by individual single functions, but by internal systems. The brain operates not by the isolated or combined functions of structures or the actions of individual neurotransmitters, but by the development of systems by which neurotransmitters and brain structures are coordinated in terms of some major function, so that the brain has a hierarchically supraordinate integration of some basic functions, but that the same thing is true for psychological functioning, so that psychological functioning is not an epiphenomenon of brain functioning, but the development of particular structure and functions of the mind that in turn get organized into systems and influence behavior, so that brain systems influence psychological functioning that develops into systems, and finally the combination of them influences behavior. So that we have to think, instead of thinking in a linear way, genetics determine neurobiology, determines behavior, symptoms. We have to think genetics determine neurobiology, which operates in systematic functions that influence psychological development, that in turn organizes at its own level into systems that then influence behavior, and finally permit to analyze that behavior, keeping in mind these two levels of structural functioning. That's the basic idea. I don't think it is very original, but it is dramatic how often it is ignored. And neurobiologists sometimes ignore completely psychological structures, and psychoanalysts ignore the neurobiology. Okay, I'm end of theory. practically, and I want to go to very simple, generally agreed upon concepts that permit to clarify the relation between personality and personality disorders. What do we call personality? It is the total sum of psychological functioning of the individual that permit the individual to relate to the psychosocial environment and at the same time monitor his or her own psychic functioning and organismic state at the psychological level. So that it's an umbrella concept that includes all psychological phenomena, regardless of their origin. And there are certain basic components to it. And we'll go into each of these components. The first one is temperament. That's the basic structure of the personality. What is temperament? Temperament is the general reactivity of the organism. Affective reactivity, cognitive reactivity, behavioral reactivity. It is genetically determined, constitutionally given, and shows from the moment of birth. Nurses who take care of babies know that babies have personality, by which they mean reactivity, particularly affective reactivity. Affective reactivity is clearly determined by neurobiological developments, by the developments of affects. What are affects? Affects are psychophysiological functions and structures. They are packages of a series of related biological and psychological events that go together. Basically, they are experiences of pleasure or pain, positive or negative, rewarding or aversive, subjective experience that have the function of the fundamental motivational systems. In other words, affects are the fundamental signal that tell the organism, this feels good, go for it, this feels bad, get away from it. So they are the fundamental motivators of behavior, as Piaget for the first time pointed out many years ago. Affects originate in the functioning of the limbic system, and we can divide the brain roughly into limbic functions and cortical functions. That's an exaggeration, but an important neurobiologist, Siegel, has said, well, if you put your thumb in your hand and then you cover it, that's the brain. The thumb represents the limbic system and the cortex on top of it, and that's enough to start out with. More concretely, the hypothalamus originates the basic affect developments around the so-called 4 F's, major functions: fight, flight, feeding, and sex. Okay. These basic functions are in addition to organismic regulation of temperature and of course feeding function means regulations in terms of affects that determine hunger, thirst. This basic origin then goes into higher levels of the limbic system, and now there is a sharp divide between positive and negative affects. the structures that determine rage, fear, are completely separate from those that develop enormous pleasure in affiliation, sexual excitement, euphoria. On the negative side, the most important structure is the amygdala, and within the amygdala, subdivisions that determine rage or fear. Positive affects are originated at the tectum and the nucleus accumbens, and by different channels, the stimulation from these structures is conducted to the cortex, particularly to the prefrontal cortex, and in the prefrontal cortex and preorbital cortex, and particularly the central part of the prefrontal cortex, the ventromedial aspects of the prefrontal cortex is a receptacle of affects, and it's only at that level that potentially positive and negative affects can be integrated, in which there's also the confluence of the anterior part of the cingulum, so that that junction between anterior part of the cingulum and the ventromedial part of the prefrontal cortex has a central function in which the subjective feeling of pleasure or pain gets combined with a sense of the cognitive context in which these feelings arrive. The cortex of the brain has the function of permitting the development of the knowledge of the immediate environment, of the external world. It gives a cognitive picture of the external world, and it gives a cognitive picture of what's going on with the body by the thalamocortical tract that communicates sensorial experience from all over the body to that same area. And we can step back for a moment and say that basically one could classify the basic brain functions, or brain systems rather, into the affective system determining motivation, the cognitive system giving a cognitive context, what's going on now that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and providing at the same time information from the external world and from the body, and information that is not information that is of course intimately linked with the perceptual system, with the sensorial organs that also converge all the information on the cognitive brain. You may add to this a very basic function of permitting conscious in contrast to unconscious functioning, and you have the main tasks of the brain: affect, cognition, perception of external reality, and of the reality of the body. So, first component of the personality are affects that are constituted therefore by a subjective experience specific for each of the basic affects of rage, fear, disgust, euphoria, alertness, and sexual excitement that is usually left out of basic affects, and that has cultural implications, not scientific blindness. And at the same time, that subjective experience combined with a cognitive framing derived as I mentioned, that central point of the prefrontal cortex, a specific facial expression that is typical for each affect, and it was Darwin who first observed that all animals of the same species have the same affective expression for the corresponding affects, and that includes human beings. So there is a genetic determination not only for subjective experience and its cognitive framing, but for a specific facial expression and associated psychomotor movements. And that facial expression, by the way, has an essential communicative function that is essential in the survival of mammals, because mammals are born before they are fully ready to survive, and their head is too big to be fully developed in the abdomen of mother, and they have to develop after birth, and therefore have an extended period of time in which they need to be taken care of, and affects signal the needs of the organism, and the genetic determination that determines affect expression is the parallel to the genetic determination to the capacity to reading affects that mother has as an inborn function under normal circumstances, and that permit then the caretaking animal to realize what's the need of the infant, how to take care of that, so that the communicative function of affect is extremely important in terms of survival. And of course affects appear with mammals and have a basic survival function. In addition, all these processes determine neurophysiological development, changes in neurotransmitter activity, and determine neurovegetative discharge. So subjective experience, facial expression, cognitive implication, communicative function, and finally the establishment of affective memory, so that the concrete experience under affective interactions is stored and permits the development of knowledge of expectable reaction of the environment. And it's the hippocampus that is the central organ that controls the establishment of affective memory. Affective memory, which constitutes the basis for learning under conditions of affect activation. And one has to think of the development of rage or pleasure or fear as simultaneous processing of the subjective experience, cognitive integration, affective memory, discharge, communicative function. In the activation of affects, the baby establishes a relationship with mother who is able to read the baby's affects and acts accordingly. This in turn is a very important general system